Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our next session where we're going to be talking about what makes P2P fraud so easy to do. And I'm delighted to be joined in the conversation by friend, founder of AP Now, and renowned business author, Mary Schaeffer. Delighted to have you with us today, Mary.
Thanks for having me. And
Uh,
I love to talk about fraud, so I was thrilled when you invited me to come and talk with you about it.
Well, you're one of my go-to people to talk about the topic because, as I was saying, you're a renowned author on
Hmm.
the topic and know so much about it, particularly around the procure-to-pay space.
Hmm.
And today we're talking about what makes P2P fraud so easy to do. Perhaps let's sort of rewind right back to the beginning and think about, well, how does it happen in the first place? I mean, in your opinion, do you think it's something which people maybe that get into it and deliberately go about fraudulent activity? That's always the case? Or do you think sometimes there's an element of opportunistic to it?
I definitely think it's both of them, and I think people have to be really aware. When we think about fraud, we always think about, the guy, or it could be a woman, but I'm going to say guy in another country, sitting at a computer, hacking away. But with that overlooks the fact that a lot of times it's people that you know, and it is opportunistic. People see a weakness in your processes, a weakness in the way you do things, and then they take advantage of it. So one of the things I like to say, especially about procure to pay fraud and also expense reporting fraud, is that the first time it happens, it's an accident. Maybe somebody sends a second invoice because you didn't pay them on time and you pay it, or somebody honest mistake puts the same thing on two expense reports and you pay it twice. You don't catch it. And then at some point they realize and they go, I didn't, these people don't
Mm,
have their act together. And then they repeat it and they repeat it and they try and take advantage of it. No one likes to think that their employees would steal from them, but just keep in mind if you have a weak uh, link, if you will, in your accounts payable or your procure to pay process, the people who know about that weak link the best are your employees and also your ex-employees.
hmm.
So it's something to keep in mind, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I suppose, as you're saying, so it's both of those things because we quite often think, as you say, that any fraudulent activity is always something which people have purposefully gone about
Right.
and done. But sometimes, those, like you say, those weak gaps in the processes can be highlighted by those people who are intent on defrauding the organization or become intent after they found those gaps and then
Right.
keep on doing it time and time again.
A
Um,
lot of times people will know about a gap in your organization and your processes and they won't take advantage of it, but
mm.
there are a few who will. And you got to keep that in mind.
And I was talking to somebody just last week, actually, and talking about fraud in the UK as being something of a growth industry. Is that something that you're seeing in the US as well?
Yeah, because we obviously we could also talk about technology and have a wonderful conversation about that. And technology has kind of made the global platform much smaller. And
Mm,
now, where maybe 20 years ago we didn't see as much fraud coming at us from other countries, now it's coming at us in droves from other countries. So, and also everybody has access to a computer, and so sadly, it's putting fraud within the reach of a lot more people. And when I say within the reach, I mean people who are trying to commit it.
Do you think that's because maybe it's being reported more or being found out more,
Well,
or do you think the figures themselves are going up?
I think it's both. I think
Mm,
absolutely, like a lot of other things, it's being reported more, and so it was going on in the past. We just didn't know about it because nobody
mm,
found it, and so
mm,
they were successful. And if they were smart, they kept their mouths shut and they just went about doing it. But also, when you tell me, like we were talking just before we started about YouTube and whatnot, when
mm.
you tell me what you're doing and I see how easy it is for you to do it, then I'm like, I can do that.
Mm.
So, sometimes we don't do ourselves any favor with all the reporting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is there you talked about at the beginning, you talk about the typical archetypal person that we might think of. Do you think that's still the case, or has that moved now? Could you tell who is a
No.
profile of a fraudster?
No. And
That's a shame, isn't
so
it?
I want to make it clear. Sometimes people will think one of my favorite stories is uh, uh, Kelly Paxton. She talks about pink collar crime. I don't know if I've
Hmm.
ever had you on with, but anyway, she talks about pink collar crime, which is embezzlement in the U.S. And she talks about working for a company who they realized they were being embezzled, but they couldn't figure out where it was coming from.
Hmm.
So she went in and she was going to do the investigation, and they took her around and introducing her to the various people and telling her, who they, whatever. And they went past the bookkeeper, whose name I think was Gladys. And they said, oh, that's Gladys. Don't worry about her. She's not smart enough to steal from us. Well, guess what? Gladys
Hmm.
had been stealing from them for 20 years. So when you say, oh, who should I look for? Everybody. There's no one single profile. It's not always men. It's not always women. It's not always young or old. It can
Mm.
be anybody. So don't get this idea in your mind that, oh, Jane would never or Joe would never steal from us, because you know what? Association of Certified Fraud Examiners reports that when there is an internal fraud, the most likely person to have committed it is a long-term trusted employee.
Hmm. And that's what's so hard, isn't it, really? Because I'm sure for a lot of people listening to our conversation today, they'll be thinking, "Gosh, that's terrible, isn't it?" Really, that must be so awful. But of course, it could never happen here.
Right.
But the
And
trouble is,
that's a very good point, Ellen.
mhm.
Don't think, oh, it could never happen to me. That's only something that happens at other places. Because you know what? It could.
Exactly, and I think it's that kind of I don't want to say misplaced trust, because it would be horrible to go about our working lives or everyday lives not trusting anybody that we work
Right.
with. But I think if you have the right elements of controls in place, you can
Right.
um, help trust you more, but it helps prevent that kind of trust taking over, I suppose. And I guess a lot of the people, and maybe, and probably yourself as well, have been following the PPN news stories over the years. Quite often, they are people that have been working in organisations for a number of years, and it's quite can be quite tragic, really.
So I want to just share. Kelly Paxton also has she hashtags this, hashtags that, and she has, and this is one of my favorite ones. Hashtag trust is not an internal control.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is something. It's so hard to get that, though, isn't it? It's so hard. You can hear it and think, yeah, yeah, I know that should happen, but it's so hard to actually believe that,
Hmm.
and to do something about it. Um, so, looking back at all of the fraudulent cases that you have, I can say be involved with, but that
Yeah,
you have
I've
highlighted over
seen,
the
right.
years, you've seen over the years, um, what do you think are the most common traits out of all of those, the telltale signs that you could share?
So a lot of times, a fraud will go on in an organization for a long time, be it internal or external, and then when it's uncovered, people go, ah, how could I have not seen that?
Mm,
So, we can talk a little bit about some common telltale signs, but the audience should be aware that there are continually new frauds. So don't think, well, if I just focus on these, I'll be okay.
hmm.
You have to focus on everything. So I like to say, and I'm going to say this if you ask me to summarize at the end, rush and secrecy are a criminal's BFFs, best friends forever.
Mm, hmm.
So anytime somebody's trying to get you to do something quick, don't tell anybody about it. That should send a red flag. Bullying should send a red flag. For example, if any of your invoice processors are getting called by someone who is allegedly a supplier to hurry up and make a payment, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up.
Mm,
It's the possibility that that is a fraudulent increases. It could just be that they need the money, but there's that. Anything out of the ordinary that's not the ordinary way that you do business, that you conduct business. So, for example, if wire transfers, Usually the CFO gives the instructions to the controller and the controller gives them to whoever's going to do the wire transfer. If that person is all of a sudden getting the instructions by email from the CFO and saying, hurry up and do this, don't discuss it with anybody, that should be a red flag.
Hmm.
Um, I like to say it's always easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. If it really did come from the CFO and it really was a rush, you can apologize and say, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't fraud.
Absolutely, yeah. So in advance of anything happening, yeah.
Right.
No. Okay, so I mean, I know that you've been researching AI
Oh, yeah.
recently. So let's talk about a little bit about technology. Do you think, or what sort of place that do you think AI has when we're talking about fraud prevention across procure to pay?
So be aware that the criminals, as I'm sure everyone is aware, not only are using technology, they're
Mm,
using AI today. And in fact, there was a big fraud in Hong Kong, which I'm sure many people listening to this are aware of, where the AI that was in use, it was a Zoom call, and they used the AI to create a deep fake of the guy's boss. And he
mm,
ended up wiring $25 million, or the equivalent of $25 million it was in Hong Kong. So be aware that this is going on. Um, Also, where you can start to incorporate AI into your processes, you probably will see a lot of the technology out there starting to incorporate it just the way it is incorporated into the invoice processing automation. And it can help you identify potentially fraudulent transactions. Now,
mm.
just because a transaction is identified as potentially fraudulent doesn't mean it is. It just means you need to do a little bit more research because the AI isn't perfect yet.
No, absolutely. And one of the topics that we've been talking about quite a lot at PPN is around that the technology piece, including AI, and making sure that you've still got that element of human control. And for now, that's not really going anywhere
Right.
soon. So you're
No,
going to
no.
have that human element in place as
I,
well.
I like to say the AI should be a tool or an aid. It's not, we're a bit away from it replacing any humans, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some of the repetitive tasks, it's taking away the
Hmm.
inefficiency involved in all of those key strikes for individuals. But it's never going. Well, I say never. Certainly not in the immediate future. Going to be taking people away altogether. That's for
Right.
sure. But if people do want to input AI into their P2P processing, where would you say is the best place for them to start?
Well, you have to learn about it. And so the two things that, and they're not the only ones by
Mm,
far, is you want to set up and this is free. So you want to set up a free Chat GPT account and start playing around with it. You want to set up a free Microsoft Copilot account
mm,
and start playing around with it. What we need to do in the P2P space and all the accounting and finance space, and actually everybody needs to do this, we need to learn how to write queries that the AI can understand. So, simple example, I was doing a talk on AI and I wanted to use Microsoft Copilot to generate all the pictures, the graphics that I was going
mm.
to use. So the first time I did it, I typed in, I needed a picture of a clock. I said, give me a picture of a clock. And it came back and it gave me a list of places where I could buy a picture of a clock. And then so I had to go back and say, now draw me a picture of a clock. But that is how we've got to learn. We've got to learn how to, and the only way to do it is to practice.
Yeah, making
And
sure that you're asking the right questions.
making
Yeah.
sure you're asking the right question and then checking the answers because they're not always correct. But I got to tell you, those pictures were pretty good.
Hmm. And as with humans, it's a learning process. AI, it's a learning process. It's
Right,
just learning it very, very much quicker than we possibly can.
right.
Um,
But
um,
uh, but I want to say, Ellen, it's not hard. It's not difficult to learn.
mm,
One AI expert that I was talking to, he said to me, it's easier than learning Excel. And I was a little bit, I was like, oh yeah, sure. But you know what? He was right. It is
mhm.
easier than learning Excel.
And maybe to some extent, we talk about AI in procure to pay. and how it fits into our day-to-day processes. But we also talk about fear involved in it as well. And I think that actually getting started with something, understanding what it can do to for you, actually helps to alleviate some of that fear as
Right.
well when you've got your literally hands-on experience in it as well. One of the things that we do at our and I know you've been to a couple of them, our P2P
Hmm.
Transformation Summit. One of the activities that we have done there in the past as well is actually build a bot, so build your own
Right.
robot. And I think that one of the things about that is people literally get their hands on, build something,
Right.
see what it can do for them, and like, oh, okay, now I can understand better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but when we're talking about fraud, it's also but it's not just the people involved and them wanting to set out to do it in the first place. As we said at the beginning, sometimes it's about the processes, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you think that fraudulent activity actually feeds on poor process?
Yes, yes. It not only it feeds on it, but even for somebody on the outside who doesn't know what your poor process is, sometimes it'll allow a fraudulent transaction to come through it.
Mm,
So, I like to talk about, fraud protection and, your building blocks of fraud, to protect your organization against fraud. And
mm,
kind of the first building block, if you will, is to have strong internal controls. Don't be lulled into this feeling that, oh, none of my employees would steal from me. You're 99% right. 99.75% of your employees won't steal from you. But that 1/4 of 1% who will can do incredible damage. And
mm,
remember the long-term trusted employee. You don't necessarily know who that person who's going to take advantage of you are. And also, your poor processes just allow somebody else's, whatever scheme they're trying to um, uh, perpetrate, allows it to kind of flow through, and then they get their hands on your money. And don't think that they'll only do it once.
mm,
They'll do it numerous times. One other thing I want to mention, it's not fraud per se, but we're, going on that slippery slope or that gray field. If you make a duplicate payment, to a vendor, some of them will return it. Some of them will issue vendor credits, and you can get your money that way, although that's additional work. Some of them just won't say anything and hope that you don't discover it. And
mm,
some of them will say, aha, they don't know what they're doing, and they'll try and get you to make the mistake again and again. Is that fraud?
mm, mm-hmm.
I think so, but you can't, obviously you can't accuse a supplier of defrauding you unless you have much stronger proof. But it doesn't matter. That's all money that's going out the door, and that's all because of poor processes.
Hmm. So it's making sure you get those processes right in the first place and don't allow that kind of activity to take place.
Yeah.
Um, so what would you say would be the most common types of fraud that you come across?
So we can this changes over time, and we can talk about it. You don't have this issue; we have it in the United States because we still have a lot of paper checks. So
Mm,
if you were to ask me that about the U.S., I would have to tell you that check fraud is the most common type of attempted fraud. But I caution people about focusing on, oh, this type of fraud is the
mm,
most common, and we've got to protect ourselves against it because fraud is across the board. If you went back probably now 7, 8, 9 years ago, there was almost no wire transfer fraud. We know today that's one of the most common frauds, and there are continually, sadly, new frauds. So don't focus on one type. Focus on all types of fraud. Realize that we can lose the money any place, and so we've got to be ever vigilant. If something looks odd, investigate. Don't just
mm-hmm,
think, oh, it's me. That Hong Kong fraud that I mentioned earlier, the guy, he finally reported it, but he said something in his gut told him that something was wrong. If something in your gut is telling you something's wrong, then investigate. Take a moment. Because it's really easy, again, as I said before, to apologize for
mm.
taking that extra minute. I'd much rather do that than be in there trying to explain why I sent $2 million to someone I shouldn't, and oh, by the way, we can't get it back. That's £1 million.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess to some extent it's actually stepping back and allowing yourself a little bit of time, isn't it? And I suppose as well that's what the fraudsters are trying to not allow you to have,
Right,
by
right.
them rushing and pushing you to do something. They're trying to take away your thinking time, and we've. As we talked about on at PPN quite a few times, that's where we've seen that there's fraudulent activity happen. And as you say, happens time and time again. I think we were just reporting on a fraud last week where we had somebody who had been in the company for, I think, 15 years and had been defrauding the company for roughly about the same amount of time that he had
Right.
been there. And actually, it turned out he had defrauded a previous company as well. But the employment agency that he got the next job through didn't flag that up or wasn't aware of it somehow.
Wasn't aware of it.
Their due diligence wasn't as thorough as it should have been.
I don't know if this is the case in the UK, but in the US, if there is not a police report filed, and there rarely is,
Mm,
then the employer actually is putting themselves at risk for a defamation of character
mm,
complaint if they were to say that in an interview or in a, giving a reference. So they typically don't report it, and then the person
mhm,
goes and does it again.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of that from our perspective, but yeah, I mean, it just a company would need to find out and do their research into the individual that they are employing to make sure that they don't have that kind of history for sure. Um, some of you have been talking about fraud, and I know we've talked about it in the past before. Do you think there's ever going to come a time where I talk to you and I say, "Hey, Mary, this year we've seen a decrease in fraudulent activity. It's not a growth industry." Do you think we'll ever see that day?
Well, I would hope that we would see it, but I'm not optimistic about it. So my feeling is it's going to continue. Um, will it go down? Maybe like we get. It seems that we get good at protecting against one
Mm,
type of fraud. Like we've gotten really good in the United States about protecting against check fraud. I know that's not something that you
mm,
have to do, but then we've seen the explosion of wire transfer fraud. We've also had a fraud. You probably wouldn't have this where the criminals came in and they got employee data that was being reported to our taxing authorities, and
mhm,
then they were able to use that for identity theft and to file false tax returns, and they got money from the government. So there's all sorts of new things that are, yeah, we get one under control, and then they're at us with something else. So I'm not optimistic. Let's put it that way.
I suppose it's about just remaining vigilant, isn't it? Just making
Yes,
sure that you're aware of all the different types of fraud that there are happening,
right,
particularly as it relates to your own area of
right.
business, and try and make sure your processes are up to date and that you can try and protect yourself as much as possible. I know to
Yes,
some extent the technology which we're seeing coming into our space is helping a little bit more. We
yes.
can help. It can help us detect that. And I know to some extent, across Europe and elsewhere, where those e-invoicing mandates are in place, it's helping to close the tax gap a little bit. So I guess in some areas we're getting better, in others we're still a little bit wide
You know
open.
what,
So,
Ellen? We're not even talking about that over here. And it
mm,
really saddens me because they carry on about the tax gap, which is, it's real, but
mm,
then doing something like that, it's not politically uh, feasible. I'll leave it at that. I won't
well,
rant and rave.
well, I guess Mary, let's maybe to finish the conversation, if we could give people listening to us today, if they wanted to have, I don't know, your top tips to try and protect their organization, what would you say? Maybe 5 of your top tips to help people.
Okay, so they're pretty generic,
Mm,
okay, and they're pretty basic, so there's no reason for anybody not to do them. Okay, so number one, be suspicious. If something looks odd, question it. If it's not the way you normally do business, question it. I think today no management is going to criticize you for questioning something, and if they do, all you have to say is, I just wanted to make sure that we're not being defrauded. So if something looks odd, question it. If it's outside the normal way you do business, question it. The next point is, I like to say, I think I've already said this, hurry and secrecy are criminals'
Mm.
BFFs. If somebody's trying to get you to do something fast without checking, without verifying, a red flag should go up. You say, why do I have to hurry up and do this? What
Mm.
is it? And so you want to just have that red flag go up. You want to have your processes have strong internal controls, have controls across the board. Don't allow that one exception, which so many companies do. They have perfect internal controls, and then Joe, the controller, or Jane, the accounts payable manager, or the P2P director, has access to everything. Remember the long-term trusted employee. It's
Mm.
also to protect that employee, because if I'm another employee and I'm looking to defraud the company, I'm going to try and get the user ID and password of that person who's got access to everything, not to Ellen, who can only do one thing. So just remember that that's protecting both the company and the individual. Also, if you do have a weakness in your system, remember your employees know best where the weaknesses are in your
Mm.
processes, and there's that 1/4 of 1% who will take advantage of it. So, no exceptions across the board. Be aware that there will be continually, this is number 4, new frauds and new targets.
Mm-hmm.
So don't rest on your laurels when you think you've got everything in place, and you probably do to protect yourself. Realize that there'll be new targets. Today in the United States, over 60% of the frauds are focused on the accounts payable, somebody who works in the accounts payable department. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason for that is simple. They have access to the money, they're making the payments. And 10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought about it. So, along that line, number 5, you need to make sure everybody within the organization knows about a new fraud as soon as it's going on and what to do to protect it. So I like to
Mm-hmm.
say share the news immediately and share it with people like Ellen and I so we can share it with the rest of the community. Put it on LinkedIn, okay? Because, it takes a village when it comes to fighting fraud, and we're all in this together.
Fantastic. That seems like a very good place to stop the conversation, Mary. Thanks very much for sharing all of those insights with us. So you heard it here first, Mary Schaeffer's 5 top tips to help protect your organization. And as she's just said, no reason not to do it. So,
Right.
well, thank you very much, Mary. Thanks for sharing all of that with us today. And thanks to you all for joining us. Take
Thanks,
care.
Ellen. Thanks for an interesting conversation.
Thank you.